Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Celia Vuocolo. I'm the Wildlife Habitat and Stewardship Specialist with PEC. I was featured in that video and we thought that would be a great way to start off our session. I'd also like to just briefly introduce my colleague, Claire Catlett, who will also be presenting with me today. Claire, did you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Catlett, and I'm the Land Conservation Field Representative with PEC.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and Claire, would you like to share our presentation?
Yes.
Great, thanks so much. Thank you. So Claire and I have both been working on this restoration initiative with PEC for several years now, and it's a really collaborative project that involves working with a lot of different conservation partners, federal and state agencies, and landowners. Next slide. Just a little bit more about me. I am PEC's Wildlife Habitat and Stewardship Specialist, and I manage our Sustainable Habitat Program. I work in all of PEC's 9 counties and primarily help landowners who are interested in managing their land for wildlife habitat. Next slide. I'd like to just briefly introduce you all to PEC. We are a 501c3 nonprofit focused on protecting the northern Piedmont of Virginia's natural resources, rural economy, history, and beauty. I like to say that we work to enhance the quality of life for all Piedmont residents. Next slide. PEC works in a 9-county region, as I mentioned, that includes Loudoun, Clark, Fauquier, Madison, Culpeper, Orange, Greene, Albemarle, and Rappahannock counties in Virginia. Our region is pretty unique. We have the DC metropolitan area that sits just to the east of us, and Shenandoah National Park in the rural farm country to the south and the west. Our landscape is composed of farms, forests, thriving towns, and rural communities. Next. Our region is also strategically located within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So much of our land conservation work and wildlife restoration work directly benefits Chesapeake Bay water quality. Next. We believe that our role in the region is to engage, educate, and empower residents to become strong advocates. We believe that communities should have an active role in land use decision-making and natural resource protection on the state, local, and county level. Next. So I'd like to start off the presentation with a little bit of background on the eastern brook trout. So brook trout are considered some of the most beautifully colored freshwater fish that inhabit cold water streams along the Northeast region. They are a game fish that is highly prized by anglers, but are also an important species for conservation. Brook trout are an indicator for water quality, meaning that they need cold, clean water to survive, and they really don't like it warmer than 68 degrees. And therefore, they indicate if there is ideal habitat and stream conditions. And in Northern Virginia, they are now found only in the headwater mountain streams that flow out of Shenandoah National Park. Next. So humans have a long relationship with brook trout that really began with trout as an important resource, food resource for early Americans. Many Native American tribes that lived along the East Coast fished for trout and other similar species, and for some, the sustenance that was provided by the fish was an important part of their culture. You'll notice the large photo I have here on my slide of a weir, which is essentially an underwater dam that was photographed on the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. This photo is from a recent, really interesting article by the Bay Journal, which shared research involving the cataloging of these weirs that were constructed by Native Americans to catch American eels as they migrated up the Susquehanna. American eels live side by side with brook trout and are also of conservation concern. And we found them at our restoration projects, and they benefit from our conservation work. American Indians also fish for eel, and these weirs are likely over 6,000 years old, which means that they are older than the Great Pyramids. Next slide. We know that in our region, it was the Monacans' homeland, but Virginia's first written history about brook trout dates back to the early 1700s with the very first European settlers. Healthy trout fisheries were just one of the many vast natural resources that they came across in the New World. This excerpt is from John Fontaine's 1716 journal, and he talks about fishing in what is now the Shenandoah River, which is located in the northeastern part of Virginia. Brook trout became an important part of the earliest settlers' diets, as it was for Native Americans. Moving forward in history to the 1920s, we find that mountain families and communities that lived in and around what is now Shenandoah National Park relied on brook trout as part of their subsistence diet. These are excerpts that are taken from the Shenandoah National Park Oral History Project that is housed at James Madison University. These oral histories captured mountain life, and in many of them, fishing for trout is fondly remembered. Next slide. As life changed in the Blue Ridge, trout fishing became less about subsistence and more about recreation. Here we see photos of President Hoover fishing at Rapidan Camp in the early 1930s. Today, many remnant trout streams are actively sought by fly fishermen from around the country, and the people who live next to them still speak very fondly of their connections and memories of trout. Next slide. In fact, just a few months ago, the Department of Wildlife Resources posted a write-up on 8 trout stream destinations in Virginia that host some of the best trout fishing in the state. DWR highlighted the trout streams in and around Shenandoah National Park as one of the 8, which is where PEC and our partners are focusing our restoration efforts. Next slide. Today, headwater trout streams that support the last surviving native brook trout populations look like this in Virginia. This is an example of a classic Blue Ridge trout stream taken in Rappahannock County at one of our project sites. Headwater streams in our region are characterized as small, perhaps just 6 feet across or less, very rocky, dynamic, fast-moving water with riffles, and have pools with logs and tree roots that provide protection for aquatic species, and most importantly, are surrounded by mature forests that cool and filter surface water. Next slide. So here's a breakdown of all these habitat features to really give you an idea of how dynamic these stream systems are. It starts with the rocky or cobble bottom, which is where brook trout lay their eggs. So sometimes what happens with streams is they lose their water quality. Increased sedimentation in streams impacts the female trout's ability to find suitable areas to deposit eggs. If you're an angler, you know that the best spots to cast your line would likely be in the pool, kind of to the right here on the photo, or near what we call in-stream cover, where mature trout like to hang out and hide. I frequently receive questions from folks that have streams and are really keen to kind of clean up their stream by removing woody debris that may fall into their creek. I always say that protecting these natural resources is very important to maintaining habitat quality for trout and other similar aquatic species. So these are habitat features that are natural and should be protected. The riffles are fast-moving water that flows over the rocks, works like a bug conveyor belt, and provides hungry trout with dinner that are just waiting in the pools. And last but not least, you'll notice the dense forest canopy that helps to shade the stream, keep it cool, and provide leaf litter for macroinvertebrates. Next. Our centuries-long connection with eastern brook trout in Virginia is being threatened, however, from a couple of different sources. Land use change due to unsustainable farming practices and development has historically been the main driver of decline, along with, however, the building of roads and dams, which blocks migration and movement of the species, which is another huge issue. Additionally, introduced game species like brown trout and invasive species can predate on young brookies, which can suppress their populations. Climate change effects and water acidification are also a problem in our area. Next slide. This is a map of the eastern brook trout's current range in the Northeast. The red areas represent locations where trout populations have been greatly reduced. Yellow shows reduction at a lesser scale, and gray means that they've been completely extirpated from an area. The green, which is the smallest amount of color on the map, unfortunately, are the native brook trout strongholds. Next slide. In this purple oval, you'll see PEC's region, which has some trout strongholds, which you'll see in green, but also it has experienced some extirpation and population losses. To me, all this together adds up to restoration opportunities to protect what we have left and restore what we've lost. Next. So here's an even closer look at our region's trout streams. On the map on the left, you can see the spine of Shenandoah National Park in the dark green on the left side of the oval, which abuts Rappahannock, Madison, Greene, and Albemarle counties, which hosts the trout streams on private lands that flow out of the park. On the right is a map of sites where Shenandoah National Park Service biologists monitor brook trout populations in the park. I want to point out that while we have a mix of declining and stable populations in our region, the park has documented a noticeable decline in brook trout populations within their boundaries, which is pretty concerning. My colleague Claire will be talking more about this in a little bit. Next slide. So PEC recognized an opportunity to harness the relationships with local landowners and communities that we've been building over the past 50 years and launch an initiative to restore and reconnect stream habitat for brook trout. We believe that the successful restoration of this species in our area rests in the cooperation of private landowners, PEC, our partners, and the Virginia Department of Transportation, all working together. Next slide. This is Trout Unlimited's river conservation strategy of protect, reconnect, and restore, and I've applied it to our region. So the protect area represents Shenandoah National Park and associated private conservation easements that are found just outside of the park. The reconnect region demonstrates our current fish passage restoration project area, and then restore shows the work that PEC and our partners do to protect farmland and restore degraded riparian buffers for water quality. Next slide. I'd like to drill down a little bit more on the reconnection piece since it's the focus of our restoration work. For brook trout, it is incredibly important to the long-term viability of their populations to be able to move through a stream system to access ideal spawning areas, search for more food, disperse genetics, and escape environmental events and impacts like droughts, major flood events, and land use changes. When road stream crossings for driveways and roads are constructed across a stream, they can create conditions that prevent fish from being able to physically move through the structure. These crossings then become barriers to aquatic organism movement and trap individuals on one side of the crossing and block off access to additional habitat. Reconnecting streams to each other to allow aquatic organisms to access more habitat is key to restoring this species. Next slide. As I mentioned, road stream crossings create barriers to movement or fish passage by preventing fish from moving easily through its structure due to a couple of different physical factors. Culverts or pipes that sit several inches above the water surface make it difficult for any fish to jump up into it unless they are an adult brook trout. And even then, if the culvert is elevated greater than a foot off the surface, like the one shown in this photo, an adult brook trout cannot jump high enough to swim through. Also, undersized crossings that pinch the stream, as well as shallow crossings that create conditions where water flow is either too fast or the level is too low for a fish to cross it, create passage problems. Many times, road stream crossings that are acting as barriers have two or all three of these issues, plus some. Next slide. I like to say what's bad for fish is usually bad for the landowner. Crossings that are creating barriers for fish tend to be either aging or falling apart or not sized correctly for the stream channel and create flooding issues for the landowner. Fish-friendly crossings that are designed using a technique called stream simulation design, which takes into account the characteristics and flow of the natural stream channel, have been shown to be more resilient to storm events. This photo, for example, shows a fish-friendly crossing in Connecticut, and the arrow is pointing to a rock that stayed in place despite flooding from Hurricane Irene in 2010. This means that the stream bed was able to retain its physical characteristics and handle extreme flooding thanks to a properly sized crossing. Next. Our stream restoration project began with a landowner survey in 2012 that was sent to 200 streamside landowners that live along Class 1 and 2 trout streams across a 4-county region. We asked these landowners what types of restoration projects they would be most interested in participating in, and the overwhelming majority said they wanted to address barriers to movement or road stream crossings. So in 2014, with funding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we surveyed 133 crossings, which covered roughly 20 or so trout streams. This was actually my first project at PEC, and I personally surveyed with an intern all of these stream crossings. We used the River and Stream Continuity Project Volunteer Protocol, which was the predecessor to the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity, or NAC survey, which some of you may be familiar with. This survey is widely utilized across the East Coast to assess aquatic organism passage issues. And I just want to mention too that we chose to assess only Class 1 and 2 trout streams, which meant that basically we were ensuring that our work would conserve the most imperiled populations that already existed. And I also want to point out too, sorry, Claire, just go back one, thanks, that 58% of the road stream crossings we surveyed are owned by the Virginia Department of Transportation, while the rest are private. So this means that our restoration work requires 2 different strategies and sets of resources. Next slide. So we took our data or information from the 2014 Aquatic Organism Passage Survey, which told us that about half of the road stream crossings in the region, both private and VDOT owned, were causing some sort of passage for trout. We prioritized those sites into our first project list, and then we chose 2 pilot projects, one on Spruce Pine Branch in Rappahannock County, and the other one was in on the Robinson River in Madison County. Both of those were privately owned. Since then, we've worked with Trout Unlimited to replace the crossing at the popular White Oak Canyon trailhead for Shenandoah National Park, which was what the video was about, and just wrapped up our largest restoration project to date at Bolton Branch in Rappahannock County, and Claire's going to share some more information about that. We're also spearheading an innovative partnership with VDOT, which has produced 2 pilot projects on public roads in Rappahannock County. Next. So while PEC has been a leader in this initiative, we would not have been able to do this work without the support and expertise of our partners. And partners like Trout Unlimited, National Park Service, Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, and the list goes on, have really helped us build these projects and expand our reach. And I also want to say as well that we're very thankful for a lot of the funding that we received from foundations like the Nimick Fordsway Foundation, the Campbell Foundation, the Ohrstrom Foundation, and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Next slide. So I've been working on this project for about 7 years now, and I'm never ceases to amaze me how many people, landowners, agency folks, and just the general public really have rallied behind the restoration work of brook trout. And I'm really excited to see how we can harness some of that enthusiasm and support to really build on our program over the next 5 years. So at this time, I'm going to pass it to Claire, and she's going to talk about our partnership with the Virginia Department of Transportation and some of our project work.
Well, thanks, Celia. So my name is Claire Catlett, and I am the field representative for Rappahannock and Fauquier counties in the Piedmont with the Piedmont Environmental Council. And I got started at PEC back in 2017. My background prior was in some stream restoration work. I'd worked with a design build firm in New Mexico. So getting to work in the wet, as they say, was a lot of fun coming from the dry streams of the Southwest. So when I joined at PEC, one of the first things we looked at, Celia and I, was, she had done these great surveys, as she mentioned, to indicate where barriers were on public and private roads at trout streams in our 4 counties here. And so we created a prioritization model using an interactive GIS format that ranked sites according to their water quality and habitat improvement potential. We were able to categorize a lot of different parameters under those two big umbrellas of water quality and habitat. And that was what we thought, the kind of two foundations of what makes a good stream restoration project. So you can see on this map, the dark red being the highest priority and the paler colors, the lower priority. So we were able to pick off a few of those projects based on their high priority status, and also just the kind of always the linchpin, landowner willingness, finding landowners that wanted us to work with them. So the first place we did our restoration work was at Bolton Branch. It's the top of the list, at Spruce Pine Branch back in 2017, which if you look over here, I'll see if I get my laser pointer. There we go. Is right down here. And these again are headwater streams coming out of the Shenandoah National Park. Pretty rare spots in a lot of cases because, as Celia showed it earlier, a lot of the trout habitat has been lost throughout the Shenandoah region. So these are kind of rare slices of heaven left for the brookies. And then we went on to do Robinson River, which is just downstream of White Oak Canyon. For those that joined us in the beginning, PEC worked with Trout Unlimited at White Oak Canyon in 2019, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we had a nice video shown, and I can put a video link in the chat for those that might want to catch that 5-minute short film later. So these are the projects we started at, all on private property, Bolton Branch, Spruce Pine, White Oak, and Robinson. So then the next big leap of faith we took was let's go talk to our Virginia Department of Transportation, and hopefully we can address that slight majority of stream crossings that do indeed cross public roads, or public roads I should say, are crossing streams. So here we go, back to where we started in our humble roots at Spruce Pine Branch. This is very typical of a driveway crossing. Actually, you can tell here how there's even 2 layers of culvert. This is what landowners commonly do, is they just slide in another culvert as the other rusts itself out. But this was failing for a lot of obvious reasons, and the landowner was going to replace it. So we were able to step up and say, yeah, we're here to help. Because Celia had done those surveys. We knew this was a trout stream, and this would reconnect about 1.5 miles of stream. So here we are. This is what we call a prefabricated steel bridge. These bridges are, not exactly cheap, but they're not exactly expensive. Private landowner who's willing to make the investment, seemingly might afford this, but we did use a grant with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and their National Fish Passage Program to pay for the materials and construction. All in, this is about an $84,000 project that includes engineering costs that were absorbed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then the bridge itself was about $30,000. All right, so the other pilot projects we've been up to, White Oak Canyon, and this is a very popular trailhead. Many of you might have heard of going here in the summertime, especially to go swimming at Shenandoah National Park. This is a site that, again, has a pretty obviously failing crossing, but this was on private property that was leased to the park. So the park's main interest, had this right-of-way crossing. And so we were able to work with the landowner. His name is Jimmy Graves of Graves Mountain Lodge. And he was more than happy to do something to help out the brook trout. And again, Trout Unlimited led the construction on this project. And I will point out that that previous slide has what I would have called a trout cul-de-sac. All the trout stopped right at those culverts. I'll just flash back so you can see what I'm talking about. And then when we put in that open span bridge, it's a nice open stream channel, much more flood resilient and much safer for the public to access that popular trailhead at White Oak Canyon. Then we go up to Bolton Branch on our little driving tour of Virginia's Blue Ridge. And we have here the beginning of a series of projects. You're going to hear me talk a lot about Bolton Branch, and this is a really beautiful trout stream. With the projects we're doing here, we'll reconnect over 2 miles of habitat, and you can tell by the line on the map all the way up to the top of the national park. So here we are again. I'm just going to try and show you. This is the national park kind of boundary just to the left or west of this property. This farm is in conservation easement, and PEC knew the landowner through our surveys. The first step of this project was this downstream restoration area and this new bridge, the green box. There are other barriers to aquatic passage on this road that we'll talk about. We'll talk about this VDOT crossing in a little bit, but there's also an upper driveway that we're going to be replacing as well. So again, what are these barriers? What do they look like? This is a poured concrete slab with about a 6-inch diameter pipe through the bottom of it. It's very difficult for trout to navigate this. And it's also very difficult for the landowner to navigate this if it's been raining a lot. It was also a pretty decent chunk of concrete to pull out of the stream, I might say. And indeed we did that, and we're able to replace it again with one of these open span bridges. Again, if you're interested in learning about them, Yard King is where we ordered both of these bridges from Catlett, Michigan. This project was funded with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So thanks to them, we were able to do our design and engineering design work and our construction for this project. So just downstream of that driveway is the restoration area, and this is the in-channel restoration. This is a unique part of this project because the landowner particularly loves brook trout and is a very eager and supportive angler who said, I want to do everything I can to help out the brookies. So we took his stream, which was degrading due to erosion. You can see there's some head cuts, and this photo doesn't quite do it justice, but it's greater than 4 inches, some of these waterfalls. And for most brook trout, that's about as high as they can jump. We want to lower the potential slope of this stream to be more even. And so you can see here, these are mountain streams. There's going to be a slope, but we're installing riffle and pool structures to stabilize the channel, and that's mid-construction, what you see on the left, so you can see the beginnings of that riffle pool structure going in place. We also widen the stream bank, so you can see, we have access to bank full on either side. And then we also were able to fill back in this eroding channel. The stream had straight cut itself down in a head cut on one side. And this is what it looked like after. We finished up, planted a bunch of native trees and seeded the area with wildflowers, and it grew up quite nicely last summer. And so what are we doing out there now to make sure that the brook trout are coming back? We're working with the Department of Wildlife Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to monitor our sites. We're going to be monitoring them for 5 years after the construction is complete. So for some of these projects, we're only in year 2 or 3 after construction. But what we're already seeing is really inspiring. We do see the population, at kind of all levels, all species going up, and I'll share some of that data with you. But we also see the brook trout moving downstream, which is what we would hope, coming out of the Shenandoah National Park and finding a home. Oh, okay, 5 minutes to go. So let me sort of speed ahead. Again, Celia mentioned that the brook trout were in decline in the national park. So fishing regs have changed for the park over time because of the lower populations of brook trout. And why is this happening? Why are brook trout losing their habitat? This is climate change, and we've kind of looked at that more closely about the impacts of flooding and drought effects. And you can see that the intervals are becoming more frequent here. And just to get to the good stuff, the VDOT pilot projects that we have are at Bolton Branch and Piney River. And so how did we get these projects started? It took a lot of creativity, but we decided we would do these projects based on the fact that VDOT wanted to replace these structures anyway. They were due for scheduled maintenance. So we formed our partnership with VDOT and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to kind of put together some funding, as well as, all of the necessary tasks to complete this project. So you can see down here at the bottom, I have the project's costs, and then in parentheses is what VDOT would have normally spent on these projects. So we consider that the in-kind value for these projects, and that's the bulk of that 30% of what VDOT has put in for these projects. And then PEC and the Fish and Wildlife Service, we've created technical support and additional funding for materials through grants and our own internal capacity. So these are the two projects that we're doing with VDOT. You can see here that they need some work. And the concept here is, we want to improve greatly these crossings. So the picture up here shows how small the diameter on some of these pipes are in these low water fords. And we're shooting for something more like, ideally, an open bottom span, which is complete bank full width, or a bigger culvert that really does maximize the channel's ability to access its bank full width, and its countersunk is the magic word there, to allow for low flows to pass through. Another great design option are these bottomless arch culverts, and these do span the creek's channel and allow for flood resiliency, and also are great for aquatic passage for obvious reasons. And then here's a picture of something that we've been looking at with VDOT more closely on these pilot projects. These concrete span bridges are also pretty cheap and regularly put in by VDOT. So here's a little roadmap that I'll end on how you can work with VDOT. You have to do that prioritization, as Celia talked about, for surveys and knowing where you can make an impact. Meeting with your local VDOT district. We're here in the Culpeper district, so getting to know your local district. Also, local leadership is very important. And because we're running out of time, I'll let you read ahead and know that I'm here for questions, and you can contact me afterwards.